train did not look dangerous. That was the first lie. Motion is protection. The modified boxcars destroyed that argument. Soundproofed walls, hidden compartments, chemical toilets, air filtration, no windows, no emergency exits. These were not accommodations. They were tools of confinement. Jurors did not deliberate long. Devine was convicted on every count. The sentence amounted to 47 consecutive life terms plus 900 additional years. His assets were seized. His company dissolved. The trains were sold. The proceeds redirected to victim compensation. Justice extended beyond the architect. 93 crew members and guards faced charges. Some claimed ignorance. Evidence showed otherwise. Messages discussing special cargo, extra payments for silence, instructions designed to avoid inspection. 67 were convicted, receiving sentences ranging from 15 to 40 years. Others were acquitted. A small number cooperated, trading testimony for reduced punishment. Clients were harder to reach. They were wealthy, connected, protected by layers of legal insulation, but money leaves trails. Emails remained. Wire transfers spoke plainly. 47 clients were arrested. Executives, politicians, lawyers, public figures. Some accepted plea deals. Others fought and lost. 32 were convicted, sentenced to decades in federal prison. For the survivors, justice felt distant. Freedom came with consequences. Motion haunted sleep. Darkness lingered behind closed eyes. Many could not ride in cars or trains without panic. Therapy helped. Medical care stabilized bodies. Financial compensation, averaging $2.8 million per survivor, rebuilt homes but could not repair memory. Operation Iron Chain dismantled a system, but it did not erase what it had done. The trains had stopped. The verdicts were final. For 6 years, TransContinental ran a mobile prison network in plain sight. 23 freight trains, 117 modified boxcars, always moving, rarely stopping, never staying in one jurisdiction long enough for a warrant to matter. By the time paperwork was approved, the train had already crossed into another state. Authority expired, responsibility dissolved. Yet one question remained. How many other systems were still moving trusted unchecked and quietly waiting to be exploited? In the months after Operation Iron Chain, America confronted an uncomfortable truth. The crime had not hidden in darkness. It had traveled openly, protected by routine and trust. The rail system had not failed because it was weak. It had failed because it was assumed to be harmless. That assumption no longer held. Federal oversight expanded quietly. Mandatory inspections of freight cars were introduced. Randomized checks disrupted predictability. New technologies were deployed to detect human presence inside sealed compartments. The goal was not punishment, but prevention, to make the weaponization of infrastructure harder, slower, and more visible. Congress passed the Railway Security Enhancement Act. Funding followed. Penalties increased. The lesson was clear. Systems built for efficiency must also be built for accountability. Speed without scrutiny creates shadows, and shadows invite abuse. The 117 modified boxcars were destroyed, crushed, melted down. Their steel was repurposed into a public memorial installation. Once instruments of silence, they became reminders, proof that even the most ordinary structures can be turned against people if vigilance fades. For the FBI, Operation Iron Chain became a case study, a model for interagency coordination, a reminder that modern crime adapts faster than static rules. Criminal innovation had exploited jurisdictional gaps. Law enforcement responded by erasing those gaps through preparation, cooperation, and speed. But the operation raised questions no statute could fully answer. How many disappearances were still unexplained? How many industries relied on assumptions that no longer deserve trust? Trains were not unique. Shipping containers, data centers, logistics networks, supply chains, each moved constantly, efficiently and visibly. Each carried potential for misuse if left unquestioned. Michael Torres understood that better than most. Inside those cars, time collapsed. There were no windows, no daylight, no night, just vibration, darkness, and the constant sense of being carried somewhere unknown. Prisoners lost track of hours, then days, then themselves. Guards spoke as little as possible. Food arrived without explanation. Motion replaced memory. After his recovery, he returned to journalism, not to relive his captivity, but to warn against complacency. He spoke about preparation, about patterns, about the danger of dismissing anomalies because they are inconvenient. He survived because he had anticipated risk. Hundreds of others had not been given that chance. Special Agent Jennifer Morrison remained in federal service. Her career advanced quietly. There were no victory tours, no public celebrations. Success in this case meant silence restored to places where suffering had once traveled traveled undetected. The 156 survivors rebuilt their lives unevenly. Some returned to families, some relocated, some never fully escaped the sensation of motion beneath their feet. Trauma does not obey sentences or statutes. It lingers, it reshapes, it demands patience. Operation Iron Chain ended a system. It did not end the threat. Infrastructure does not choose sides. It reflects the intentions of those who control it. When oversight weakens, when assumptions go unchallenged, neutrality becomes camouflage. What moves freely can hide freely. What is trusted can be abused most effectively. The train stopped in 17 minutes, but the warning remains in motion. Never assume that what carries goods cannot carry harm. Never ignore patterns because they disrupt routine. And never believe that constant movement makes something untouchable. Because a prison does not have to stand still to be real. And the next signal may not come from a beacon implanted in a body, but from whether society is willing to look again at the systems it no longer questions. No chains were needed. The train did the work. Outside, life went on. Families searched for missing loved ones. Police filed reports. Journalists chased dead ends. Witnesses vanished before testifying. Business disputes ended without explanation. One disappearance looked tragic. Two looked suspicious. Dozens looked like coincidence. And coincidence was the shield. The rail network connected every state, every city, every economy. It was never designed to be searched for people. That blind spot became the hiding place. The crime was not hidden underground. It moved through the heart of the country, past homes, schools, and highways every single day. For years, nothing broke the pattern, until one man disappeared who had prepared for it. Until one signal escaped the darkness. 47 freight cars rolled quietly across the American landscape, moving from Seattle toward Chicago on a routine commercial route. The markings were familiar: CSX Railway. The cargo manifest was clean: electronics, automotive parts, textiles. The kind of shipment that crossed the country thousands of times a week without drawing a second glance. And until the illusion that a train could not be a prison finally collapsed. Kidnapping was not new. Law enforcement had fought it for generations. Safe houses were raided, warehouses were traced, remote compounds were discovered and dismantled. The crime followed a familiar rule: people were hidden in places that stayed put, and because they stayed put, they could eventually be found. What made this different was motion. When the FBI began reviewing 6 years of disappearances, there was no obvious crime scene, no shared suspect, no common method, just people who vanished without violence, without ransom, demands without bodies, witnesses in federal cases, journalists digging into corruption, activists, business rivals, individuals who had become inconvenient. Special Agent Jennifer Morrison noticed the anomaly first. She wasn't looking for trains, she was looking for patterns. 47 cases stood out, not because they were identical, but because they were clean. No surveillance footage, no financial trail, no confirmed sightings after disappearance. Yet when Morrison overlaid the timeline, something subtle emerged. Every disappearance occurred within 24 hours of a freight train passing nearby. Not passenger rail, freight. She mapped locations against rail schedules. The lines crossed cities, then crossed states, then crossed each other. When the data settled, one name kept appearing along the routes: TransContinental Logistics. The probability that this was coincidence was less than 1%. Morrison understood the danger immediately. Trains moved faster than warrants. Jurisdiction changed with every border. A judge in Illinois could authorize a search only for the train to be legally untouchable by the time the order was signed. Static investigations were being outrun by steel and momentum. This was the blind spot. Nothing about the train invited suspicion, and that was exactly the problem. The FBI requested inspection authority. It failed. The trains were private freight. The cargo was sealed. There was no probable cause that could keep pace with constant movement. Every legal pathway closed just as it opened. So Morrison changed strategy. Instead of chasing trains, she tracked behavior. GPS devices were placed during brief stops. Routes were logged. Timetables compared. Over 3 months, the FBI followed 23 trains as they crisscrossed 17 states. Patterns emerged again. Certain cars never carried listed cargo. Certain cars were always present. Certain cars were never opened. Those cars became the focus. Inside the Bureau, concern turned to urgency. If Morrison was right, people were being moved continuously beyond rescue, beyond jurisdiction, beyond time itself. The longer the trains ran, the more likely prisoners would be executed to erase evidence. Or worse, trains could be deliberately derailed, killing everyone inside. The investigation reached its breaking point with one name: Michael Torres. Torres was an investigative journalist who had exposed corporate corruption. He knew enemies came with the job. He also knew disappearing was no longer theoretical. When he was abducted from his home, drugged and sealed into darkness, he did something no one else had been able to do. He sent a signal. A surgically implanted emergency beacon activated under specific pressure, silent, undetectable, broadcasting his location to satellites overhead. The data reached the FBI within minutes. The signal was moving because hidden among those 47 cars were 5 that carried no freight at all, no pallets, no boxes, no inventory numbers. What they carried could not be logged, could not be scanned, could not be admitted out loud. Westbound, CSX rail line, speed consistent with freight transport. Morrison didn't hesitate. She recognized the pattern instantly. Torres wasn't missing, he was in one of the cars. And for the first time, the prison in motion had been exposed. But finding the train was only the beginning. Stopping it would be something else entirely. Finding the train did not solve the problem. It exposed how little room for error remained. A freight train could not be stopped on suspicion alone. Engineers needed cause, rail authorities needed justification, and law enforcement needed jurisdiction that would not evaporate as the wheels kept turning. The signal from Michael Torres confirmed an active kidnapping, but the train carrying him was already cutting across open land, pushing west, closing distance to another state line with every passing minute. This was where theory ended. Morrison understood the risk immediately. If the operators realized they had been discovered, they could execute prisoners to erase evidence. They could scatter bodies during night stops. They could even derail the train, killing everyone inside and claiming mechanical failure. Motion had protected the crime. Panic could weaponize it. The train was in Wyoming, remote, sparse coverage, limited authority. Morrison initiated emergency coordination with state patrol and railroad police, pushing the kidnapping designation through every available channel. Each request had to be approved in real time. Each approval lagged behind the train's progress. While agencies debated, Torres remained sealed in darkness. They carried people. Inside the boxcar, there was no indication that anything had changed. The floor vibrated, steel groaned, air moved through unseen vents. Without light or sound, motion became the only reference point. Time stretched, minutes felt like hours, hours collapsed into something shapeless. Survival depended on not thinking too far ahead. The authorization finally came as the train crossed into Montana. This was the window. The Montana Railroad Authority issued an emergency mechanical stop outside Billings. The engineer complied. Steel screamed. Momentum resisted. Then the train slowed and halted in open terrain. For the first time since Torres had been taken, the prison stopped moving. FBI tactical teams arrived by helicopter. Vehicles approached from service roads. The scene was controlled quickly, decisively. There was no announcement, no negotiation. The operation depended on speed and surprise. Cars were opened one by one. Electronics, automotive parts, textiles, exactly as listed. Then came car 23. Inside were armed guards, not railroad employees, not confused bystanders, professionals. They attempted resistance. It lasted seconds. The threat collapsed under overwhelming force. Behind a concealed wall, the compartment was revealed. Men and women sealed into secret compartments built inside standard boxcars. Soundproofed, lightless, airtight enough to hide breath. Mobile prison cells racing across America at 70 miles per hour. Darkness that never stopped moving. Silence enforced by steel and speed. Michael Torres was alive, disoriented, dehydrated, unsure whether days or weeks had passed. His extraction confirmed what Morrison feared most. This was not an isolated incident. Inside the car were records, lists, routes, names, evidence that other people had occupied the same compartment before him. Some had been released, others had not. That realization changed the mission instantly. One train was no longer the objective, the system was. Stopping a single train saved one life. Stopping all of them was the only way to save the rest. Morrison understood what that meant. 23 trains were still moving, 17 states, dozens of jurisdictions, hundreds of miles of rail. Any delay could cost lives. Any leak could trigger retaliation. This could not be sequential, it had to be simultaneous. The plan that followed was unprecedented. Every relevant agency was contacted: state police, rail authorities, federal partners. 73 agencies positioned assets along known routes. Emergency stop scenarios were prepared. Mechanical failures, track obstructions, federal orders. Every justification needed to be ready at once. No warnings, no staggered actions. The danger was not just the crime, it was the disguise. If even one operator alerted another, the prisoners could be killed. The operation was given a name: Operation Iron Chain. And once the signal was given, there would be no second chance. At 2:00 p.m. Eastern Time, America's rail system received a message it had never carried before. Emergency stop orders went out almost simultaneously. Not one state, not one train, but across 17 states to 23 moving freight trains that had no idea they were about to become crime scenes. The clock started the moment the first command was issued. From that point forward, every second mattered. This was not a raid, it was synchronization. CSX command centers issued reports of mechanical failures. State rail authorities cited track obstructions ahead. Federal orders followed short and non-negotiable. Stop immediately. Do not proceed. Do not communicate with other operators. Compliance was mandatory. Some engineers obeyed without question. Others hesitated, confused by the sudden urgency. A few resisted asking for confirmation. In those cases, confirmation arrived in the form of flashing lights and squad cars positioned across the tracks ahead. Steel met certainty. There was nowhere to go. Within minutes, the trains began to slow. In Montana, in Illinois, in Nebraska, in Virginia, in states separated by thousands of miles, the same action unfolded again and again. Steel screamed against steel, brakes locked, motion surrendered. One by one, the moving prisons came to rest. America's rail system was built on assumptions that freight cars carry freight, that trains are too large, too routine, too constant to hide something deliberate. Those assumptions had never failed before, until now. FBI tactical teams were already in position. Helicopters dropped into open terrain. Armored vehicles rolled along service roads. Rail yards filled with agents moving with precision. There were no speeches, no dramatic confrontations, just commands and compliance. Trains were secured, crews were separated, guards were restrained before evidence could be destroyed. Some tried. Phones were smashed, documents burned, hard drives thrown from cars. It didn't matter. The system was already exposed. Every train stopped was another link in the chain locked in place. When agents opened the modified boxcars, the scale of the crime became undeniable. Hidden compartments were discovered in 19 of the 23 trains. Inside them were people, 156 individuals alive, confused, dehydrated, and terrified. Some had been inside for days, others for weeks. One woman had been transferred from train to train for 4 months, her family long convinced she was dead. When agents told her how long she had been gone, her body gave out. The information was too heavy to process all at once. Medical teams moved quickly. Dehydration, malnutrition, psychological trauma. Every survivor showed signs of prolonged sensory deprivation. Some could not stand, some could not speak. All required care. Immediate survival was only the first step. Recovery would take years. By the time the final train was secured, 17 minutes had passed. 17 minutes, 23 trains, 17 states. The company behind the operation called itself TransContinental Logistics, a respectable name founded in 2018 by Marcus Devine, a former railroad executive who understood the system from the inside out. He knew how inspections worked. He knew how jurisdiction fractured at state lines. He knew how speed erased accountability. And he knew something else most criminals never grasp. What normally took hours of coordination across jurisdictions had been executed with military precision, pre-positioned assets, pre-approved authorities, no room for improvisation, no margin for error. One delay could have meant executions. One warning could have triggered derailments. Speed saved lives. As the operation concluded, one truth became clear. This was not just a criminal enterprise. It was a warning. Infrastructure trusted by millions had been turned against them. Systems designed for commerce had been repurposed for captivity. The trains were no longer moving, but the consequences were just beginning. The arrests began before the trains had fully cooled. Marcus Devine was taken into custody at his home in Virginia hours after Operation Iron Chain concluded. He did not resist, he did not run, he appeared calm, composed, almost relieved that the moving machine he had built was finally still. His wealth, his influence, his reputation as a logistics innovator offered no protection once the evidence surfaced. What investigators seized was staggering. 6 years of records. Every transport logged, every client listed, prices paid, routes traveled, locations where prisoners were released, transferred, or disposed of. 847 names appeared across the files. 847 lives disrupted, erased, or ended. Of those, 156 had been found alive inside the trains. The remaining 691 became the focus of a massive secondary investigation. Some were eventually located alive, released in remote areas, and too afraid to return. Others were never found. Wilderness swallowed evidence. Rivers erased traces. Mines and remote terrain became permanent graves. For families, certainty was uneven. Closure, when it came, arrived years late and at an unbearable cost. The courtroom process took time. 3 years of trials, motions, testimony, and forensic reconstruction followed the operation. Devine faced 847 counts of kidnapping, alongside conspiracy, human trafficking, wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering charges. His defense claimed ignorance of client intent, insisting he offered legitimate relocation services.